Hey, everybody. Welcome to this month's Azure Container Apps Community Livestream. I'm Anthony, and I'm joined by Cary and Simon today. We're going to talk about some pretty exciting stuff. Cary's going to show us everything that we need to know about networking and more with Azure Container Apps. And Simon is going to walk us through add-ons. How are you two doing?
Pretty good, thank you.
Excited to be here.
Cool. Yeah, so let's get started. I think both of you have been on the show before, and then you can probably, if you want to introduce yourself some more, you can do that when you do your demos. So we're going to start off by going through some community highlights again. So as usual, we have published the July edition of our newsletter, and you can check that out here at this link on the screen right now. And I'll leave that up for a bit. And yeah, so we're covering in the newsletter we have a bunch of community highlights which I'll kind of quickly go through before our demos today. So the first one is and I apologize if I get your name wrong, but I think it's Eid, who wrote a really detailed article about how to set up Azure Container Apps with Azure App Gateway. And so, yeah, so it kind of walks through all the steps, including how to build your Docker container, get it up and running, and get it connected with App Gateway.
Yeah.
Next article.
Really nice. Sorry, just interrupting real quick about that one. What's really nice about that article compared to our documentation is this one has a lot of screenshots. We don't have any screenshots. So if you guys like pictures, look at this one.
Yes, that's right. It's lots of pictures on this one. Cool. Next, we have an article by, who is this? Carl, about how to deploy Azure Container Apps with Dapper using Terraform. So, again, they work through some pretty good details on how you can actually set up your Terraform scripts and run them so that you can deploy your app and configure Dapper by using Terraform.
So personally, I'm a big fan of articles that have infrastructure as code as part of them because recreation is super easy. You know.
Yep.
You
Everyone can try it.
Screenshots or anything like that. So.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and it's less likely to change too than our screens because quite often we're making some changes to the portal and then the screenshots go out of date. So, yeah. Cool. So the next one is Batsurai, who wrote an article on how to run scheduled jobs on Azure Container Apps. And yeah, so basically they go through how to set up a .NET application and how to publish your container image from Visual Studio. And then from there, we go ahead and set up the scheduled job. So pretty cool article if you want to get up and running on jobs. And then here's a super long article here from Paulo about, I don't even know if I'm going to try to read this. Azure OpenAI, LangChain, ChromaDB, Chainlit chat app in Azure Container Apps using Terraform. So that's a lot of words, a lot of technologies. So a lot of things that Paulo covers here. So here's the architecture of everything that they walk through in this article. Yeah, you can see it's super detailed.
Look at the scroll bar on the right-hand side.
Yeah. I don't even know how.
It just keeps going and going
around. Yep. Yeah, it's a great article.
Very cool.
Yeah. I'm sure if we wanted to, Paulo can probably turn this into probably 1 hour training session or longer. So there's a lot of content here. A lot of folks have checked this out already, 4,000 people. So a lot of people are finding this pretty interesting. So check that out. Although you probably want to block off a little bit of time before you do that. And here's one from Corey, is it? No, just kidding. It's Cary, who's on this webcast today. And actually, Cary, do you want to talk about what this is?
Yep. So this was actually a session that I gave at Build. So we did demoed building intelligent applications using Azure Container Apps. So we build an application here. It's a digital content generator with 3 different microservices. And we walk through some of the pieces of like, hey, how can container apps help with building this microservice architecture to support building your AI-powered applications. So if you guys find that interesting, go check that out. I had no idea this was recorded actually, but it was posted last week. So that was
Okay,
fun.
yeah. I was going to ask you whether or not you re-recorded it because you told me that it wasn't recorded. So
I think it was. And then 2 weeks ago, I was on vacation and I got messaged by someone on LinkedIn like, hey, this is cool. And I'm like, what are you talking about? Oh, nice.
Yeah, I guess somebody snuck a microphone in there and recorded you. So that happens. All right, cool. So yeah, so like once again, that is the newsletter. Link on the screen. Check it out. All right. So I think the next thing that we want to do is Simon's going to talk to us about add-ons. You want to take it away, Simon? Oops.
Yes. So actually, if you, I'm going to share my screen here. Come on. Coolio. So add-ons, actually, you in part announced this in your session at Build. We recently added this to container apps. Add-ons are essentially container-based services that run on ACA. The idea is that rather than having to curate your own set of images and deploy them, we'll make it easy to get started and basically keep everything inside of container apps. That makes it easy to select your region. You know it'll be there as you maybe move your app from region to region. You know you can move your add-on with you. They're really quick because, as I said, they run on container apps themselves. So they're really quick to instantiate. They use all the bells and whistles that ACA brings with it. So scale to 0 capabilities. And then we did some really good job, really cool integrations. So they make it completely seamless to actually go and use within your application. The credentials are injected, and then best of all, you can actually scale into production. So that's kind of in a nutshell in the slides or the image here. And then I was going to go and do a demo next for you. Here I've already kicked off the creation of a, let me actually crank up the size here a little bit so you guys can see this better. So I've created a container app already, and now I'm just going to go and create an add-on. In this case, I'm going to use the Redis add-on, and it's going to just kick this into gear. Little note, add-ons is still in preview. And so the Redis add-on is being created as part of my environment. And I'm going to pull up this application that we created prior. Yeah, so let's see where that comes up. There we are. So while this add-on is creating in the background, I'm going to come back to this here in a second. But this is my application I've spun up earlier. This is courtesy to a colleague of mine, it's web design straight from the 90s. But the idea being that this is an application that ultimately goes and shows off the full functionality. So we have a simple app here. At the moment, it's using memory. So and I can add this and you can see. But as you can see, the app actually, just as we did this, restarted. So I can go back here. And we created this instance. And now we're actually binding. So this means we created the add-on. It was created for us. And the next step that we're going to do here is we're going to go and bind this service, this add-on to our application. And you can see that I have an Redis, and I can say, let's see, reload this now, and I can see, hello, this is stored in an add-on. As the next step, we're going to actually go to production. So I have a separate Azure cache for Redis instance that I'm going to actually now switch out behind the scenes. Again, this is the application. We can reload here a few times, and you can see that we've already switched out our instance. Let's wait for just a second here. There it is. Come on. So what's happening behind the scenes is we're now removing this. Hold on, my demo is not working the way I hoped. Hold on a second. So let's see where the app is. All right, so we're bound to the demo Redis, and now we're going to go and unbind this demo Redis. And you can see the demo Redis is there. It runs on ACA. It instantiated really quickly. And now I'm going to go and update my app. I'm going to unbind or disconnect my demo Redis, and I'm going to go and rebind or connect my prod Redis demo. So this takes a little while, and what happens now is the connection details are removed from the app. The new connection details are being added. The app bounces once, and then we should basically receive back the output. And this can take a little while because we're actually bouncing the application, and here it is now. So you can see the app actually saw essentially no effective downtime. We have the Azure cache for Redis in here, and we can store things now. Production. You know, if I wanted to go back again, I could very easily go back again and basically say, okay, let's go switch back. So just because I am a sucker for self-torture, I'm going to try to do that live. So I'm just going to bind my demo Redis again, and I'm going to unbind my prod Redis.
Okay, so while we're waiting here, so you started off with basically an app that's basically just talking to in-memory, and then you spun up a basically an add-on that's running in Redis. That's basically Redis running in a container app, and then you bounded it to your app, which basically just set a bunch of environment variables in your app, and then
That's right.
Okay,
they
cool.
get injected into the app, and then I can basically bind, you know, use them with my application.
Okay, and then what you did in the previous step was you basically had basically like a production, like what we would call a production instance of Redis that's running on Azure Redis, and then your unbind and your bind commands or your flags are basically switching out the configuration in your app.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yes, and so the idea is that add-ons are really great for kind of smaller apps, hobby apps, or when you're trying to innovate quickly, when you don't really want to go and become familiar with Azure Cache for Redis or become familiar with Events Hub or whatever it might be that you want to use. And so you can just kind of use the add-ons instead, get your app going, get it relatively stable. And then the idea being that when you're ready to go and scale, you can essentially cut over to the production versions. And just to kind of drive that point home, I'm going to reload here one more time and we switch back to the add-on. As you can see, the app is still there. The credentials are there, and what we stored earlier is in there as well. So, and that's all I had.
Wow, that's super cool. So I think you kind of gave it away in the naming of the services there with prod and demo, but like what is the guidance on when you would use an add-on versus using a managed service in Azure?
Yeah, so the add-on is generally intended for hobby and smaller projects when you're trying to get something going quickly. Maybe you're new to Azure and you just want to go and deploy your app and try it out. And then as you kind of become more familiar with the platform, you can venture out and explore the other services outside of container apps. And so, that kind of goes in line with your ability to then scale and go into production. You can use resiliency and kind of the reliability and performance of the hosted proper services. So that's the idea behind add-ons.
Nice, that makes sense. And you might have covered this already. So Camilo was kind of asking, like, what is unbind and bind, exactly doing behind the scenes? Is it working with environment variables or secrets or both?
Yeah, so bind, unbind, kind of just like connect, disconnect, indeed. And yes, the secrets get injected alongside. So your app can pick up these environment variables and essentially underneath the covers, we will do the heavy lifting of retrieving them and injecting them, and then also kind of letting your app know that it's time to switch them over. Actually, it doesn't really have to do anything because it's going to be bounced. The container gets bounced once the bind is present or has been switched out, and so your app just picks up the new connection.
Nice. And because they run as a container app, I guess they're just built like a regular build just like a regular container app.
Basically, yes. There's no additional charge. We charge for the storage that the apps use, just like what you can use bind storage to your environment, as well as the compute. They take care of kind of all the features, serverless approach that container apps brings with scale to zero. And then at the moment, we have support for 4 different kinds of add-ons. Well, actually 3. So there's Redis, there's Postgres, there is Kafka, and soon to come is MariaDB. By roughly in 2 weeks from now, we'll have MariaDB, and we'll continue building out this inventory of various add-ons to based on user needs.
That is awesome. So yeah, so everyone check out add-ons. We put the link on the screen there. That links to, I think, documentation on how you can get started with add-ons. Is that right, Simon?
Yes. This shows basically how you can run the demo that I did a okay job running, but yourself. So if you go there at the very bottom, there'll be a tutorial on how to actually get this demo going yourself.
Nice. And as far as scaling is concerned, are add-ons scaling down to 0? Can you control the scaling of it? How does that work?
We currently do not have scaling support. They do scale down to 0 as the ideal, but you can't actually currently control the scaling of your add-ons at the moment. We're contemplating on whether or not we add that. That will likely be something on the medium-term roadmap.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Simon. So that was really a really quick but great look at add-ons and how easy it is to get started with a lot of these data type of services without you having to go and create a managed service if you don't want to. So next thing that we're going to do is we're going to talk about networking. So we're going to hand it over to Cary, and yeah, take it away.
Sounds good. Thank you. Thank you, Simon, for that demo. I didn't know too much about add-ons before as well, so it's great for me to learn. But Azure Container Apps Networking. So today we're going to be talking about more of a, I guess, high-level look at some of the features that we have for networking and ingress in container apps, as well as some of the considerations that you guys should be thinking about. Because this is a bit more high-level, if there's any networking experts within the chat watching this live stream, feel free to weigh in at any point, talk about your experience, drop a comment in the notes. But with that, let's get started. I had 2 slides. So the different things that we're going to be talking about today. So environment level networking considerations, app level networking considerations, different types of network traffic filtering, the different features you can use, and then also a little bit about setting up Azure Container Apps with additional resources. So to start off with, networking considerations in Azure Container Apps really happen at 2 different levels. There's the environment to think about, and then the application level. And we're going to start off with talking about the environment level, which really means talking about the virtual network that the environment is integrating with as well. And the environment itself, it defines a virtual networking and observability boundary around the collection of your container apps within your environment. And there's a few different considerations here. So to start off with, when you create your Azure Container App, and if you don't bring your own virtual network, there is a default virtual network that we integrate your application with. And this is not accessible to you. It's fully managed by us as Microsoft. And this does give you some very basic things, like you can get some app level ingress control, you can do IP restrictions. But it doesn't support the vast majority of Azure networking features. So things like, hey, if you want to talk to another resource that's behind a private endpoint, or if you want to use NSGs, network security groups, you're going to want to bring your own custom virtual network. So really, if you're looking for any sort of networking features outside of the container app scope, you're going to be wanting to use your own virtual network. So with that, the custom virtual network integration, it really enables your container apps to securely communicate with Azure resources, internet, on-prem networks. And when you are creating your container app environment, deciding what virtual network you want to integrate with, there's really 3 main considerations you should be thinking about. That's the capabilities that you want from networking. There's 2 types of environments, and the feature set differs slightly. What subnet size you're going to need, and then also whether or not you want to have an externally or an external or an internally exposed environment. And these are all considerations that you should be thinking about prior to actually creating your container app, because once you have created the container app environment, you've integrated with a virtual network, that piece isn't really modifiable. So those 3 things, and diving into it. So the first thing here is the difference between the 2 different environment types. In container apps, we have 2 different environment types. There's the consumption-only environment type, and then workload profiles. Both plans support consumption, but workload profiles also supports a dedicated plan. And consumption, if you guys are familiar with, is one that most of you guys are probably running your container app workloads on today. It's the one that has been GA since the service has launched. While workload profiles, we just public previewed in the spring, and we're looking for a GA relatively soon. But since both of them support consumption, though, that means that you get all the goodness of consumption features, even if you're using the workload profiles environment type. And for that reason, generally speaking, if you're using networking features, I'd recommend using the workload profiles environment type, just because it has an additional set of features that you can leverage if you so need them. If you're running on consumption, though, and you're happy, you don't need any additional features, I think that it's perfectly fine to stay there. But the main thing to call out for the workload profiles environment type is 1, there's a different minimum subnet required. So consumption was /23, which is a really large set of IP addresses, while workload profiles environments support down to a /27. In addition, we also support things like NAT gateway, and you can use UDR and firewall when using a workload profiles environment type. So going from there into subnets, there are also nuances in how, not just the size of the subnet that is supported between the two different environment types, but also how they are scaling. So when you're using a consumption plan, whether you're on consumption-only environments or on the workload profiles environments, scaling happens the same with respect to how IP addresses within your subnet are used. And that is, each replica will have one IP address allocated. The key difference here is for workload profiles environments, we have a lot less IP addresses that we require for infrastructure, which is why we're able to provide that smaller subnet requirement. And then also, if you are using dedicated workload profiles, each node itself is also going to have one IP address allocated. So that's an important consideration to be thinking about when you are figuring out, hey, what subnet size do I want to use? I know IP addresses and how you divide up a virtual network can be very important. So that's one thing to think about. And then the last one to think about at the environment level when you're creating a container app environment is, hey, do I want my container apps to be publicly accessible? So there's two variations here. You can either make your environment either external or internal. And when it's external, it just means that we're creating your container app environment with a static public virtual IP address, which means that it's going to be accessible from the internet. However, if you would like, you can create it as internal, and that means that we'll have no public endpoint. So access is going to be completely limited and restricted to just your virtual network, and resources from the internet won't be able to reach it without some additional setup. With that, we're going to dive into a little bit of the application level features that we have. So I mentioned that there's the environment and then there's the app level considerations. So what's nice in container apps is that not only do you have the considerations to think about the environment level settings, but you can also have some granular control at the application level and control like how that application itself is exposed. So there's three types of ingress here. One, you can have your application either only reachable from the container apps environment. So only if another application within the environment, if another application exists within the environment, it can reach that resource. But if it's outside of that, it won't be able to. Two is limited to the virtual network. This requires bringing your own virtual network and using a custom VNet option. But for this option, all resources with the virtual network can reach it, and then accepting traffic from anywhere. It's available to the public internet, and any application or any resource can talk to your container app as long as they have access to internet. And for ingress as well, we have support for HTTP and TCP. And when you're talking between applications within your environment itself, there's a number of ways to reach your application. So you can either use the fully qualified domain name for your container app, which is automatically assigned. Or if you wish to set up a custom domain name, you can configure a custom DNS domain for your container apps environment. Or if you are using another application within the same environment, so let's say you have container app 1 and you want to talk to container app 2, they both exist in the same environment, you can just use the application name. So it makes it super easy to do those communications between applications. Now, really quickly and briefly, there's a different whole set of features as well for filtering the network traffic. So figuring out, hey, who is able to communicate with my application? What resources is my application able to reach out to? So there's IP restrictions, and this is the 1 out of 3 that happens at the application level. So IP restrictions you'd have to set individually for each application, and you can basically say, hey, which IP addresses do I want to restrict or receive traffic from? Network security groups happen a bit more broadly at the environment level. And have broader sets of rules than just IP addresses. You can do restrictions on a greater number of things. And then user-defined routes is largely for the outbound traffic here, and is set at the environment level. And it really enables customers to use things like firewall, network appliances to route the outbound traffic. And finally, getting into some of the other resources that you can use with Azure Container Apps. So the first one here that we've seen a lot of customers using is Application Gateway. An Application Gateway is really useful as it can be a reverse proxy in front of your container apps. And what that means is that you can place it as a front end so that all traffic coming in goes through the gateway first and then gets routed to your container app. So you can imagine that you have, like, let's say 5 to 10 different applications, and you want certain kinds of traffic to go to each application, but you want to reach one endpoint. You can use that gateway, application gateway, to do that traffic routing. It also offers some additional features in terms of like additional security layers and things like that. But that's definitely one resource that is good to look into. And when you do set up the application gateway, you can either set it up just you can set it up with a private DNS to talk with Container Apps environments. So you can have that connection be entirely secure and travel entirely through the Azure backbone. So the traffic would never be publicly accessible until it gets to the gateway endpoint, in which case you can decide. The next one that we have seen a lot of customers use and integrate with is Azure Front Door. And this is very similar in a lot of use cases to Application Gateway. But the key differentiator here, and the thing to think about, is Application Gateway is regional level interface, while for Azure Front Door, it is global. So if you have resources in multiple different regions and you want to route traffic between them, Azure Front Door would be the way to go in terms of being able to route that traffic between regions. And finally, and this is only supported for workload profiles, environment types, is Azure Firewall with UDR. So if you're looking to really restrict that outbound traffic from your container apps, so let's say you want your container apps to reach out to site A, but you don't want it to talk to site B, you can set up these firewall rules to offer a lot of additional protections for that container app traffic to resources outside. Now, the key thing to note here, though, is that there are a few rules that are required by container apps to work just in general. So if you are setting up firewall rules, you're going to need to also allow certain MCR rules for mcr.microsoft.com, data.mcr.microsoft.com, and then depending on where you might have a container registry, whether you're using Docker or you're using ACR, you're probably going to need to allow that through the firewall as well, just so that your container app can continue to operate as normal. But that is a really quick overview of some of the high-level features and some of the considerations that you should be thinking about when you're taking a look at networking in Azure Container Apps. I'll hand it back to you, Anthony. And are there any questions? I wasn't reading.
Yeah, actually, I was going to say, I think this the architecture you shared with the gateway seems to be the dominant pattern emerging, where, you know, if you split up the monolith and you're going to go microservices, the gateway is oftentimes the choke point where everyone has to come together to negotiate routes and where the app goes. So it kind of facilitates that control that you used to have with a monolith, but still gives you the flexibility for everyone to kind of work on their own apps. So I think that's very popular. And then if you really have to scale your traffic big time, you know, that's where something like Front Door comes in pretty handy.
Exactly.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I think it'll be useful for everyone.
Nice. Thanks so much, Cary. That was a lot of information you just presented there on networking. And yeah, I see that you've already shared a lot of the links on the screen there. So the first one is to learn all about container apps. And you can also go directly to our documentation, which I think you have pages and pages of articles and tutorials on how to set a lot of this stuff up.
Yep.
We do have a question. Yep, go ahead.
And I was just saying, Anthony, I can also add, I'll send you the links directly for some of the tutorials and the networking articles, and maybe we can add that in to the show notes or something.
Okay, great. And Chris has a question about whether we need to open an outbound port on port 80.
For this one, I believe it has to do with our infrastructure, but for an exact answer, I need to double check with the team. Don't give you wrong information there.
Okay. Cool. All right. So yeah. So if you have any more questions, please reach out to us on our GitHub, which Cary has shared on the page there. I can share a slightly larger link on the screen. And yeah, so that's where the team hangs out. Please come out and kind of raise any issues that you might have, any feature requests and things like that. And I see another question coming in from Carlos. And the question is, are we going to allow the ability to set which TLS versions are used by the ingress?
Yes, actually, that is a feature that we have in the works. It should be landing this calendar year. So look out for that.
Awesome. Cool. And you might have noticed that we didn't have any product updates this time around. We basically patched everything up and we announced it around build. And we're now kind of busy working on basically getting all those things that we have in preview to GA. So we, Cary mentioned a little bit earlier that the workload profiles, we're working hard to get that to GA by the end of this quarter. But there's actually many, many other features that we're also kind of doing the same for. So, so that should happen pretty quickly, hopefully.
And also, I just realized actually for Chris's question around port 80 in NSG, this is largely actually around if you're using HTTP traffic. It's the port that we use for sending that traffic. So if you need it, if you are using HTTP, that is why that port 80 would be required.
Cool. And then Chris has a question about network level. Would it be load balancer? I actually don't know.
Not sure what this. Well, Chris, can you elaborate?
Yeah, if you don't mind elaborating. And meanwhile, we have a question from Kai for Simon about
yeah, we are we're flushing out the inventory. We're going to do some add-ons, which I think together with some use cases will be really exciting. We have not contemplated enabling them on Azure Arc as of yet. This question probably makes it worth exploring that. So I will take this to the team and have a conversation. If you want to follow up in a couple of weeks, Kai, then again, as Anthony said, just file a report or an issue on our GitHub, and I'll sure to reply there as well.
Okay, sounds good. And I see that Chris's question is about encryption. This probably requires a pretty detailed answer, maybe a pretty detailed question as well. So that I would also, if you don't mind, Chris, kind of asking that, if you don't mind asking that on our GitHub repo, and we'll try our best to kind of answer your question there. Cool. And with that, I think we'll wrap it up for the day, for the month. We will come back again at the beginning of September, I think. And hopefully we'll have a lot more interesting things to share with you all. So thanks, Cary. Thanks, Simon, for joining us today. And thank you all for joining us as well. Have a good rest of your day.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.